So I welcome everyone on Nitish Mehra and Associate webinar series. Today we have with us Mr. Nitish Mehra himself present on board with us today. So he is a practicing lawyer in Delhi High Court and Supreme Court and a leading criminal lawyer. His practice his journey of practice is since 2008, and then he remains an official law researcher in Delhi High Court. So today's webinar is related to eviction and protection of tenants vis-a-vis Delhi Rent Control Act and Transfer of Property Act and situation during COVID-19 outbreak. So this topic is very much important due to the current COVID-19 pandemic which we are facing. There are so many disputes which we will face and which we are facing right now between the landlords and tenants. So to throw some light on the current topic, we have Nitish sir. So thank you, sir, for joining us today. So now you may start the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kriti, for this wonderful introduction. I would like to cover all the aspects vis-a-vis the Delhi Rent Control Act as well as the Transfer of Property Act, which are directly related to the disputes between the landlord and the tenant. During the tough times of the COVID-19 outbreak, this is the most important topic which is in the news, not only from the arena of the people, but also from the arena of the judiciary. Lots of cases has come there and judiciary has tried to deal with the matter accordingly. So for that, for you guys, I prepared a small PPT, which I would like to share with you guys. And that is eviction and protection of tenants vis-a-vis Delhi Rent Control Act and Transfer of Property Act. Let me have a clearer view of this.
Yes, sir.
So I think it is now visible to all of you.
Yes, sir.
So the contents which I would be dealing and covering in this, the definition of the landlord, tenant and the premises, the constitutionality of the act, difference between the lease and the license, waiver estoppel, eviction of tenant on the various grounds enumerated under section 14 of the 1958 Act, subletting, eviction, rights of the deserted wife, divorce, that too related in relation to the shared household, summary trial in eviction cases, section 14(1)(e), that's the most important section, bona fide requirement, and section 14(a) to 14(b) of the 1958 Act of Delhi Rent Control. Limited period tenancy, part of the jurisdiction of the civil court, and deposit of rent, section 106 of the Transfer of Property Act, which I would also like to cover today in this topic. So now coming directly to the topic, what are the rent control legislations? These rent control legislations are the example of the social legislations because these are primarily being made up for the protection of the tenants so as to answer plus the hardship of the landlords so they may not suffer it. Such legislations prevent the landlords from taking the extreme steps of evicting the tenants merely upon the technicalities and skillful grounds. These legislations are enacted to prevent the vulnerable cases called the tenants from the clutches of the landlords who often thrive onto the predicament of the tenants arising due to the scarcity of the premises. Due to the scarcity, landlords often exploit the tenants for their unjust gains and enrichment, and also subject to the tenants for the uncalled litigation, for which they are not readily prepared. No doubt, the rent control legislations are intended to preserve the social environment and propose to promote social justice, but at the same time, it has also given some safeguards to the landlords as well. Now, what is Transfer of Property Act? The Transfer of Property Act 1882 is an Indian legislation which regulates the transfer of property in India. It contains specific provisions regarding to what constitutes a transfer and the conditions attached to it. It came into force in India on 1st July 1882. According to the Act, transfer of property means an act by which a person conveys the property to one or more persons or himself and one or more persons. The act of transfer may be done in the present or for the future. The person may include the individual capacity or an association or the body of members. So let us cover first the general points. So what is a lease? A lease is a contract between the lessor and the lessee for the use of a premises as against a consideration, and that consideration necessarily called as a rent when this is a agreement between the landlord and the tenant or the lessor or the lessee in the amount of rent albeit of a property is less than 3,500 of rupees. The rent is there in the provisions of Delhi Rent Control Act. That's a social welfare legislation meant for the tenants would certainly apply. However, if the amount of rent albeit property is more than rupees 3,500, then the proper provisions of Transfer of Property Act will apply. If the amount rent charge is rupees 3,500 exact, then the provisions of Delhi Rent Control 1950 Act will apply. The ceiling limit of this rent, that is Section 3C of the Delhi Rent Control Act, was introduced by virtue of 37 1998, operational effect from 1st of December 1988. So the proceedings under the provisions of the Delhi Rent Control Act take place before the rent controller. Parties to the proceedings are called petitioner and respondent, and the proceedings under the Transfer of Property Act takes place before a civil court, that is before a civil judge. Parties to the proceedings are called as plaintiff and defendant. Section 50 of the Delhi Rent Control Act bars the jurisdiction of the civil court, but however states by virtue of the subsection 1 that nothing in subsection 1 shall be construed as a prevailing civil court from entertaining any suit or proceeding for the decision of any question of title or to any premises to which this act applies, or any question as the person or persons who are entitled to receive the rent from such premises. Meaning thereby, the dispute is only related to the title of the property that can certainly be raised with regard to the civil court, because the rent controller does not have jurisdiction to decide the title of the property. So this is a very, very important case. V. Dhanpal Chettiar versus V. Yashoda Amal, AR 1979, SC 1745. It's a 7-judge bench of the Supreme Court which held that a giving of a notice under Section 106 of Transfer of Property Act is not necessary as far as the eviction against the tenants is concerned under any rent control legislation. In order to get a decree for eviction against the tenant, the notice is not necessary as held by the Supreme Court. The tenant continues with the tenant. Thereafter, the post of serving of the eviction notice, the landlord is under the duty to make out a case from the grounds mentioned under the concerned rent control legislation, and it shall be sufficient to have the eviction thereafter. The real purpose of the notice of eviction is to terminate the contract as so subsisting between the landlord and the tenant. However, eviction is not permissible under the state rent control legislation until the specified ground of the eviction has been alleged so far. So that thereby means that if somebody has a registered agreement, a tenant has a registered agreement with the landlord, and the tenant stops paying the rent, and the agreement is registered and it is for another pending 3 years. But if the tenant does not pay the rent, then the landlord, or we say the lessor, has the option to serve him with the notice and thereby terminate the contract formally, officially, after which he can file a case for eviction of that tenant, that too for a suit of possession. Now, who is landlord? As per Section 2E of Delhi Rent Control Act defines the term landlord, definition fairly comprehensive and is stated in the widest possible amplitude. This not only includes the owner, but also the person who collects the rent on behalf of the owner. And moreover, the definition includes the legal representatives of the owner of the premises, as has been held by the Pukraj Jain versus Padma Kashyap, AIR 1990 SC 1133. The purpose of enunciating this definition at this point of time was very simple, that the definition of the landlord is quite broad, quite big, and it does not only say the person who have the title, that person can only receive. There are many classes of people who can receive the rent as the landlord. In the case of Imtiaz Ali versus Naseem Ahmed, AIR 1987, Delhi 36, it was held that even a person holding a general power of attorney does empower to collect the rent, and on behalf of the landlord, the tenant cannot deny him. In case of Emperor versus Dattaya Sitaram, AIR 1948, Bombay 239, it was held that even a clerk is empowered to collect a rent comes within the territory of landlord. The literal interpretation to the word landlord is applicable to the entire act, that is Delhi Rent Control Act 1958. But the concept of bona fide requirement, that is an exception 14(1)(e) of Delhi Rent Control Act, where the word owner has been used. So you can see the contradiction, that's a broader term has been simply narrowed down, that with regard to the particular provision, because a premises, whenever we need bona fide, so that has to be by the owner and not by anyone else on his behalf. So now, what is the meaning of the tenant? Section 2I of Delhi Rent Control Act lays down the definition of the term tenant. According to Section 2(1) of the 1950 Act, a person paid the rent on whose behalf the rent is being paid considered as a tenant. This definition is also inclusive for, as example, it includes within its periphery the subtenant also. So let's take up the case of Hemraj versus Jagdish Singh. where in this case it was held that a tenant may obtain a lease of certain premises for the benefit of his joint family. That if keeping in view the benefit of the lease will obtain the large number of the family members of the tenant, but the provisions of the 1950 Act do not take this factor into account when they provide for the eviction of the tenant on the allotment of a residence to him. All the members of the tenant must be evicted according with the tenant when another accommodation is allotted to the tenant. The tenant cannot take a ground that my family will still stay here. So he has to evict his property. Now, what is premises? Section 2I of DRC A 1958 provides that the concept of premises is basically a building, a part of building given for a tenant for a specific user. It may either be residential or commercial. And it includes a large thing in itself, then with regard to like the term premises is a combined reading of definition. The terms landlord, tenant, premises show that the premises implies subject matter of tenants, in respect of which there is a dual relationship of landlord and tenant, in respect of which the quantum of rent is agreed to be fixed between them. The term premises covers within its imports gardens, grounds, and out-appearing building which has been let out. The important factors needs to be kept in mind is that an open area needs to be attached to the building or a part thereof to be brought within the periphery term of the premises. Otherwise, it would not include within the term of premises. So now the word rent has not been defined under 1958 Act. The word rent in its simplest terms would be a consideration for the contract to be paid by the tenant to the landlord for the use of premises. In its wider sense, it means any payment made between the tenant to the landlord. In the case of Karnani Properties versus Augustine, AIR 1957 SCR 20, it was held that the term rent has not been defined in the concerned rent control legislation. Ordinary dictionary meaning can be taken into consideration for the purpose of term rent. Further, it was held that the word rent is so comprehensive that it would include within its import all the payments made for the use of the premises, so also the payments made for the use of the furnishings, electronic installation, and sometimes even the furniture supplied to the tenant by the landlord. Another interesting question that arose whether or not the maintenance charges would come within the periphery of word rent or not. So on this, there was a very important judgment of the Delhi High Court, which has been laid down in Standard Pharmaceuticals Limited versus Gyanchand Jain, AIR 97 2002 DLT 290. It was category held by the Honorable High Court that the maintenance charges do fall within the ambit of rent, and accordingly, if after the addition of the maintenance charges the rent amount exceeds beyond 3,500, then it would outstir the jurisdiction of the rent controller. That means this suit for the eviction of the tenant would then have to go before a civil court under the Transfer of Property Act. So in the case of SR Batra versus Srimati Karuna Batra, this case why I am discussing here, it's important with regard to the Delhi Rent Control Act where the word share household has been discussed. So what is held in this is that the wife was claiming the certain house of the husband which does not belong to the Amit Batra, nor it was taken by rent on him. It was joint family property in which Amit Batra was also a member. It is the exclusive property of the appellant number 2, that is mother of Amit Batra. So hence it cannot be held to be a shared household. She claimed that since Amit Batra is also the member, so therefore it should consider to be as a joint family property, but it was held that it does not belong to him, it belongs to the mother of the appellant, Amit Batra. So the ratio decidently was that wife is only entitled to claim residence in a shared household, and a shared household would only mean belonging to taken on rent by the husband, or a house which belongs to the family in which the husband is a member and not otherwise. Now, this is important. Definition of lease and license. Definition of lease is contained in section 105 of Transfer of Property Act, under which a lease of immovable property is a transfer of a right to enjoy the property. A license is defined under section 52 of the Indian Easements Act 1972 as a right to do or continue to do in or upon immovable property of the grantor something which would in the absence of such right be unlawful, or such right does not amount to be an easement in the interest of the property. Now let's have a difference in view of the judgment. Associated Hotels of India versus R.N. Kapoor, AIR 1959 SC 21262. It was held to ascertain whether a document creates a lease or license. The substance of the document must be preferred in the form that has to be in the writing. The real test is the intention of the parties, whether they intend to create a lease or a license. If the documents create an interest in the property, it's naturally a lease. But if it only permits a person to use the property which legal possession continues to be with the owner, the same would necessarily be a license. If under the documents a party gets exclusive possession of the property prima facie, if he considered to be a tenant, but circumstances may be established which negative the intention to create a lease. So now what is the connection with the Registration Act of this rent legislation? The Rent Control Act 1958 reads to be in conjunction with the Registration Act. The most important sections of the Registration Act 1908, which requires the specific mention, are section 17, 18, 49. 17 deals with the documents of which registration is compulsorily registered. Section 18 deals with the documents which is registration is optional. 49 deals with the effect of the non-registration of the documents which are required to be registered. The lease is of 12 months. From year to year, the registration is compulsory. For registration of a document like a lease deed more than 12 months, stamp duty is to be paid. Amount of stamp duty paid on the lease deed more than 12 months, for example, in Delhi, is 2% of the annual rent. And nowadays, what has been happening that to avoid such stamp duty, the people, what they are doing, they are generally resorting to go for the lease of 11 months instead of 12 months, because the 12 months is a statutory period. So in such circumstances, they avoid the stamp duty and they not come within the ambit of the registration. The collateral purpose meaning is the establishing of the landlord-tenant relationship. So now this is Delhi Rent Control Act, section 14(1)(a). These are the grounds on which a tenant can be evicted by the landlord under Delhi Rent Control Act. Delhi Rent Control Act is the same act, let me repeat, where the rent of a premises is then rupees 3,500, then only it gets attracted. It is basically in the most areas where the old markets are there, like Sadar Bazaar, Chandni Chowk, Fatehpuri, or there may be the other old markets where the premises or the shops have been rent outed on rupees 2 also, or maybe something more than that, 100, 200, 500. So in all those cases, the Delhi Rent Control Act will apply. So section 14(1)(a) of the Delhi Rent Control Act lays down about the ground of first eviction, that is the arrears of the rent. So what we have to establish by the landlord is the relationship of landlord and tenant, existence of arrears of rent, service of notice of demand, and failure on the part of the tenant to pay the rent. Once all these 4 conditions are fulfilled, then the eviction of the tenant can happen on section 14(a). But the cause of action would only arise on the failure of the tenant, that when he do not pay the rent after the 2 months of the service of the notice. Section 14(1)(a) of the 1958 Act cannot be read in isolation. There has to be a conjoint reading, and that too is section 15 of the same Act. Section 14(2) and 15 of the 1958 Act give another opportunity to the tenant to deposit the rent, and in case he deposits the rent, no eviction order is passed against the tenant. Proviso to section 14(2) says that benefited contemplated under section 14(2), read with section 15, can only be enjoyed once by the tenant. So if he has once enjoyed this proviso, then he cannot take recourse to the same proviso by not paying the rent for another 2 months. So in a way, the protection which has been provided to the tenant under this section has been provided with a rider. So section 14(2) provides that no order of recovery of possession in the tenanted premises can be made on the ground that the tenant has committed default in payment of rent. The benefit which tenant obtained under section 14(2) is avoidance of the degree of possession. The passing of an under order 13 under 15 is not really in the nature of benefit which accrues the tenant under section 14(2). So now, in the case of Hemchand versus Delhi Cloth General Bench 1977 SC 1986, it is through the minimum of section 15 that the tenants obtain benefit under section 14(2) of the 1958 Act. And the benefit continues for the acquisition of community against the passing of an order of eviction or recovery of possession of the tenanted premises on the ground of default in the payment of rent by the tenant. Section 14(1)(b), as the name suggests, subletting, that means giving it to somebody else who is not authorized to be come under the said premises as a tenant. So a lease deed is for 5 years, consisting of a clause that the tenant has an absolute and unqualified right to sublet the premises even without the permission of the landlord. The tenant sublets the premises, landlord on the contrary files an eviction petition under section 14(1)(b). Tenant, relying on the relevant clause of the lease deed, states that he has been conferred with the right to sublet. Landlord takes the stand that the lease deed is not registered and hence it cannot be read into evidence. Tenant replicates that although there is no registration of the lease deed, but it can still be used for the law collateral purposes. Now let us see what the court has held. So there is an estoppel of fact and estoppel of law. Section 49 of the Registration Act says is a nature of legal estoppel. There can be no estoppel against law. The case will go in the favor of the landlord as against the tenant, as the lease deed cannot be read into the evidence. So you have to understand that this is very important. Any tenant who has been entering an agreement for tenancy shall get compulsory register his document, because if this document is not compulsory registered, so then registered, and the provisions, if you try to take them in the court, then those cannot be taken as the lease deed is not registered. So what in the essence is required in section 14(1)(b) is the presence of a third person in the tenanted premises, that too without the permission of the actual landlord. So there are certain cases which tells that in what cases the subletting is made out or subletting is not made out. I'm not going into that. These are the cases and the citation which has been given. So all the viewers can look into this. And after 9/6/1952, subletting, assigning, or otherwise parting with the possession of the whole or any part of the tenanted premises without obtaining prior consent in writing of the landlord is not permitted. And if it is done, then it appears to be a ground of eviction of the tenant by the landlord. So now section 14(1)(c) of the Delhi Rent Control Act. The concept of injury to the premises is foundation in this clause. The change in user contemplates prejudice to the interest of the landlord. However, this provision has to be interpreted in the light of the present day social milieu, but keeping in also in mind that the provision obviously one to protect interest of the landlord. Section 14(1)(c) is to be read in conjunction with section 14(5). The test for section 14(1)(c) is that what is the primary purpose for which the tenant is using the tenanted premises. In this, I have laid down one case law, that is Ratanlal versus Asharani. The initial purpose for the premises was let on rent was to run a grocery shop. The tenant, instead of using a grocery shop, starting another bookshop therein, the Supreme Court held that cannot afford a valid ground of eviction. So, section 14(1)(c), following are the conditions which has to be satisfied by the landlord. That there has to be change of user or misuse of the tenanted premises, where the letting is governed by subclause 1 of clause C, according to which the consent of landlord is to be writing. The mere conduct of the landlord by way of acquiescence would not be sufficient to constitute consent of the landlord necessary for a valid change of user under the subclause 1 of subclause C. So as per the mandate of section 14(5), no order of eviction can be made against the tenant unless the controller is satisfied that misuse of the premises of such a nature that it is public nuisance or that it causes damage to the premises or it otherwise detrimental to the interest of the landlord. The word detrimental to the interest of landlords connote that either the property interest or the reputation of the landlord owing to the house in the locality is jeopardized. For this, you see the judgment of Pushpa Devi versus Om Prakash Kera as decided. Now, section 14(1)(d), that the premises were let out for a residence and neither the tenant or any member of his family is residing therein for the period of 6 months immediately before the date of filing of the application for the recovery of the possession of the premises thereof by the landlord. Now, what the court has to see in this regard in the Baldev Sahib Bangia versus Asif Hussain, in this case, a tenant has shifted permanently to Canada. He left behind his parents and 2 sisters and brother to coordinate the suit premises. The DRC Act under which the case had arisen contains a provision under clause B of section 14(1) to the effect that if the premises has been let for residence is not occupied by the tenant or any member of the family for a period of 6 months, therefore, preceding the date of filing the eviction petition, the landlord is entitled to the decree of eviction. But how it has to be done? The court answers the same. The question answers that whether in these facts it would be stated that neither the tenant or any member of the family shall be deemed to be. So for the past 6 months, it was held that family has to be given not a restricted meaning, but wider meaning so as to include not only the head of the family, but all the members or the descendants from the common ancestors who actually living together in the same house. Section 14(1)(e), that is the most important section for the eviction of tenants, and this section has gone a sea change, a wide in a manner that so as to include many things within its import by giving a lots and lots of relief to the landlords, including so many things in the bona fide requirement. Now let us see what section 14(1)(e) says. It has to be read with section 14(6) and section 14(7) and section 19 of the Delhi Rent Control Act 1958. Section 14(1)(e) of the Act lays down the concept of bona fide requirement. This concept of bona fide requirement generally means the premises is now required by the landlord himself or for the benefit of enjoyment of any of his family members. The section has undergone drastic change due to the case of Satyavati Sharma, dead by a large versus Union of India, decided in the year 2008. Before this judgment, this section says that 14(1)(e) was solely applicable to the residential premises, but now it is applicable to all premises, whether the import guidance would be the word bona fide should necessarily borne out from the facts of the particular case. So the word bona fide has to be construed to mean it's good faith. It means genuine, natural, real, pure, sincere, and honest. The word requirement has to be construed differently as per the requirements of different individuals according to the standard of the living. So there has been certain case laws which I have drawn out for you. So it was held that bona fide requirement has to be construed neither too liberally nor too conservatively. It was held that bona fide desire of a landlord to live in his own house cannot be repeated merely on the ground his own landlord has not asked him to vacate. The landlord is the best judge of the residential requirement. He has to complete freedom in the matter. A tenant cannot dictate the terms on the landlord. So if a plea of bona fide requirement is made by landlord, is once rejected by the controller on any ground averred by the landlord in the eviction petition, this will not preclude or debar the landlord from filing a second eviction petition on a different ground, praying for an eviction of the tenant. So you may realize that how important this section is, whereby the bar of res judicata does not come applicable to the special laws, that is Delhi Rent Control Act 1958. Generally speaking, rent controller is not vested with the power to decide or adjudicate upon the title of the premises. In a case governed by the concerned rent control legislation, and all the landlord has to prove is that he is the landlord, that is the better title than the landlord, tenant. So the necessary import which I just said in the beginning of this lecture also, that section 14(1)(e), the landlord means the owner. The meaning of the word landlord has been narrowed down under section 14(1)(e). The landlord means the owner of the premises let on rent. In the case of T.C. Rekhi versus Usha Gujral, it was held that a tenant cannot decline the vacant premises required bona fide by the landlord or his residence merely because it is possible for him, that is the landlord, to live in some other town where he may have a residential accommodation available. In D. Satyanarayan versus P. Jagdish, it was held that section 116 of Indian Evidence Act puts an embargo on the tenant of the movable property during the continuance of his tenancy to deny the title of the landlord at the beginning of the tenancy. So if a tenant do not deny that landlord's tenant at the beginning of the tenancy, so he got debarred from raising this objection at the later stage. So then there is section 116 of Indian Evidence Act which envisages that tenants is stopped to deny the landlord's title. So now directly coming to section 14(6) of Delhi Rent Control Act, which says that a landlord who is himself unable to evict the tenant for some reason should be deprived of the tempting of transferring the premises to another person who would otherwise would not be prevented from evicting the tenant. Then we have 14(7). An order of eviction passed under 14(1)(e) will not be executed within 6 months from the date of the said order. The provision has to be incorporated for the benefit of the tenant who has already suffered an eviction at the hands of the landlord, and a provision is for the benefit for the protection of the tenant. The tenant can waive the benefit and protection according to him. Thus, with the consent and approval of the tenant, the period of 6 months so granted can be waived altogether and so curtailed. Section 19 of Delhi Rent Control Act provides the recovery of possession for occupation and re-entry. These sections require that a landlord who recovers the possession of the tenanted premises from a tenant on the ground of bona fide personal requirement under section 14(1)(e) of the Act, then he does not re-let the premises within 3 years from the date of obtaining a possession of the premises from the tenant, except with the permission of the controller obtained in the prescribed manner. 19(2) provides that if the landlord has not done so, then the rent controller has the power to reshift back the tenant in the same premises as before earlier, to direct the landlord to put the tenant back into the possession of the premises or pay him such compensation as the rent controller thinks fit. Section 14(1)(f) and 14(1)(g) has to be read in conjugation with section 20 of Delhi of Rent Control Act. Section 14(1)(f) says a landlord must prove that the premises have become unsafe and unfit for human habitation. Landlord in good faith requires possession of the premises for carrying out the repairs, and the main consideration is the safety and health of the occupants who has been residing in this property for the improvement of the premises. The requirement enumerated under clause F of section 14(1)(e) of the Act are not merely the landlord but rather of the tenant or else in the public interest. An order under section G is sought so that landlord may be permitted or to be allowed to develop his property. The interest of tenant is really to be considered under clause F, but hardly under clause G. As per clause G, two requirements must be satisfied. First, premises must be required bona fide by the landlord for the purpose of building, rebuilding, additions or alterations. Secondly, the code must satisfy that the specified work cannot be carried out without the premises being vacated. So it's a little harsher on the tenants. To safeguard the interest of the tenant, section 14(8) of the 1958 Act provides that no order of recovery possession of any premises shall be allowed to be made under clause G under the controller is satisfied that the proposed reconstruction will not radically alter for the purpose for which premises has been let out the racial alteration and with the premises that same within the public interest. The controller is to take note of the fact that the planned estimates of the reconstruction are properly prepared and further necessary funds for the purpose of reconstruction are available with the landlord. So recovery of the possession and the repairs, rebuilding and re-entry, that's section 20. In this section, a very important duty has been cast upon the controller to fulfill the above conditions. If the tenant does not elect to be placed back into the premises post the repairs, then this fact shall also be recorded in the eviction petition. After the repairs of the premises, the re-entry of the tenant into those premises is the functioning of the court. 19(2) and 19(3) come only in the play where the tenant elects to be placed in occupation of the premises. It is important to note that after the tenant delivers the possession of the premises to the landlord, pursuant to the order made under section 14(1)(f) and G of the 1958 Act, specifying such date of delivery of the possession by tenant to the landlord, but the landlord fails to commence with their building, rebuilding repairs within the 1 month from the date of delivery of the possession, then as per section 19(2), the controller may, on an application made to him by the tenant in this behalf, order the landlord to place back the tenant into the premises or to pay back the tenant the compensation as the rent controllers will fit. Then section 14(1) Act, which says applies to premises which are let for residential purposes only. It has no application to the premises which has been let for non-residential premises. That's a commercial use. For a better understanding of petition under this clause, it's not necessary that the petitioner should be the owner. A petition can be filed by the landlord itself. B.R. Mehta versus Atma Devi was held that where the spouse of a tenant has built or has acquired or has allotted a residence, if the tenant has legal right to go and stay there, then clause H of section 14(1) would be applicable to the landlord to cause the eviction. Otherwise, ordinarily, a husband cannot be made to lose his tenancy merely on by acquiring the possession of a flat or allotment of an accommodation because of her official duties. So let me give you an example to you. In this case, if my wife today becomes a judicial officer and she acquires a flat because of her position there, and I am having a possession of a premises which is a rented accommodation, I cannot be simply thrown out of the premises because my wife has become a judge and I have alternative premises to reside there. So section 14(1)(j) and 14(10) of the Delhi Rent Control Act says in the case of Suresh Prakash Chopra versus B.L. Dhawan, it was held that the case under section 14(1)(j) of the 1958 Act, the following propositions is to be kept in mind. Those are the onus of proving that the tenant has caused substantial damage to the premises upon the landlord. Landlord must prove that in addition an alteration in the tenancy premises is carried out by the tenant. Tenant has made the construction without the construction of the landlord. The said construction has materially affected the tenant premises, and further that the construction which had carried out by the tenant had materially altered the premises. So what the court has to do, court has to necessarily see the nature, the character and the construction to which it makes the changes in the structure of the premises with regard to the purpose for which the premises has been let upon. So it is not like that landlord will say and the court will admit it like, okay, there has been some structural change and we are admitting your petition, let us throw out the tenant. No. A landlord has to necessarily, in terms of section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act, he has to bring on record that what is the alteration which has substantially damaged the landlord premises. So let us give an example here. If there is a barsati which has been temporarily made a shed on some angle which has been made by the tenant so as to avoid the rain or the water coming down, so that would not mean a necessary substantial change which would damage the property of the landlord. On the other hand, if the tenant has extended some chhaja out of the property which has been tenanted by him or in which he is residing, then there would certainly be a material alteration with a structure. Then in that case, it may cause later on a damage to the premises of the landlord. Certainly in those cases, eviction can be granted on this ground. So every construction or alteration does not impair the value and utility of the building, and that construction must be of material nature, as I have just given you the example. which should substantially diminish the value of the building, either from commercial and monetary point of view from the utilization aspect of the building. The alteration should be of structural nature and not merely of the deconstructive nature. The impairment and value of the utility of the building is to be seen from the point of the landlord and not that too from the tenant. Then section 14(1)(k), that has to be read with 14(11). The following things has to be done. That the user of the premises by the tenant should be contrary to a condition imposed by the landlord or the government. Such user must continue even after the notice of discounting. The condition which is contravened by the user should be one which imposed on the landlord government while giving the landlord of the lease. It's like there are certain conditions when a lease property is given by the government, when it's a bigger time lease, so there are certain conditions attached to it. So if a tenant violates those conditions, then naturally on those grounds, controller can approach for an eviction. In the case of Fakarchand versus Ram Ratan Bhanot, it was held that clause K is not meant for the benefit of the landlord, rather it is meant for the benefit of the lessor, that is the tenant, that the public authority like DDA, MCD and LNBO. It was further held that the landlord cannot waive the duty imposed upon him originally by virtue of the lease given to him by the public authority. The landlord owes a duty to the superior lessor, that is a public authority, and eviction cannot be set aside under clause K merely on the ground that the landlord himself was a party to the breach of the conditions under which the land was leased to him. That is, the landlord, just as said, that the property is leased out by the DSIIDC and the other government agencies for the factory or the commercial use. Now, what is the procedure which has to be followed in the cases when there is an eviction which has been sought under valid and control? The procedure is known as a summary procedure, which has to be followed as per section 25B of the Act. It provides as a special procedure for the disposal of application for eviction of the ground, the ground of bona fide requirement. Section 25B of the Delhi Rent Control Act lays down that the procedure is to be followed in case there is a petition on the grounds as specified in section 14(1)(e) of the 1928 Act, 14(a) to 14(d) of the Act. The procedure is that section 25B of the Act provides a summary procedure or a procedure which is akin to that of the small process. As the name suggests, the procedure under section 1958 Act of 25B, to the larger extent, is similar to the procedure enumerated under section order 37 of the CPC. So, how it works? It works like primarily in the case of summary procedure, the right to defend or to file a statement of defense is not a right matter per se. Permissions need to be sought from the court for the person to take a defense, and availing of this permission by filing of the defense in the time-bound manner. The Code of Civil Procedure provides a period of 10 days in the cases of Order 37. But in case of Delhi Rent Control Act, the period is provided for 15 days. The reply, leave to defend, has to be in the form of affidavit, laying down the grounds which would disentitle the landlord from getting the eviction order in his favor and killing the tenant. In case the landlord does not appear or his leave to defend is rejected, then the judgment is bound to follow. But in case the leave to defend of the tenant is allowed, then broadly speaking, the procedure akin to the one in the normal civil suit for any case is adopted for the rest of the trial. Under the Delhi Rent Control Act, there are no provisions applying for the appeal or second appeal. However, the revision or the review may lie under the order challenging the order of eviction, that is section 27 I'm saying article 2 to 7 of the Constitution of India, which we denote as the title under the head of CMA or the revision. In the case of Pratipal Singh versus Satpal Singh, that through LRs, it was held that there cannot be any condonation of delay, not even of the 1 day, beyond the period of statutory period of 15 days in filing the leave to defend application. And if the leave to defend application is not filed within the period of 15 days, then the bona fide necessity of the landlord, as evident in the eviction petition, has to be decreed in view of the provisions contained under section 25B subclause 4 1958 Act, which necessarily speaks deemed admissions. On the leave to defend application is not filed within the statutory period of 15 days, then the said leave to defend application cannot be considered, since there cannot be any condonation of delay in filing of the leave to defend application. So now we are on to the deposit of rent. Section 27 of the Delhi Rent Control Act says in the Atmaram versus Shamudullah Rani, it was held, the landlord was refusing to accept the rent from the tenant. Then tenant should pay the rent as per the law provided under the Rent Control Act. Section 27, 28 and 29 speaks about the rent deposition by the tenant in the court. Section 27 of the Act prescribes what necessarily to be done by the tenant. The landlord does not accept the rent, it has to deposit it in a manner as prescribed in the court. It is for him to send it through a money order. When the money order is refused, then the tenant is entitled to file a petition under section 27 for the deposit of rent. It is naturally and generally known as a petition for DR. So there is a case law which now I want to discuss from the outcome of the COVID-19. What has happened? There is a lot of dispute which has everybody knows has now arisen. During the tough times of COVID-19, there was no businesses, all the work was closed, and there was a complete lockdown by the government. So the situations were not in the hands of the landlords or in the hands of the tenants. So in that purview, before that, I may tell you that what is section 106 of Transfer of Property Act, that where rent is more than 3,500, in those cases, naturally, eviction can be filed by the landlord in the court directly by seeking the possession of the premises. So let me deal with the latest case, that is Ramanand and others versus Dr. Girish Soni and others, where the urgent application was considered by the Honorable High Court and which raised the various issues related to the suspension of payment of rents by tenants owing to the COVID-19 lockdown crisis and the legal questions surrounding the same. COVID-19 pandemic has a large-scale implications for human life. Relationships and dual relationship between the parties are severely affected with this lockdown. The question is as to whether the lockdown would entitle tenants to claim waiver or exemption from payment of rent or suspension of rent is bound to arise in thousands of cases across the country. There cannot be standard rule that the prescribed to address these cases. Some broad parameters can be kept in consideration in order to determine the manner in which the issues arise can be resolved. So what is the decision of the Honorable Court? Let us see, have our view on that. The tenant's prayer was that for the suspension of rent in view of the present case is to be considered. There is no rent agreement or lease deed between the parties and hence section 32 of the ICA has no applicability. The case governed by the provisions of Delhi Rent Control Act 1958 Act, section 56 of ICA does not apply to the tenancies. The tenants also do not urge the tenancies was under section 180BA of TPA. The tenants are also not the lessee as an eviction order has already been passed against them. The tenants' plea is for extension of the doctrine of suspension of rent to the cases which are covered by lockdown due to COVID-19. Insofar as this phrase is concerned, this court held the following factors may be necessary for determining the question as to whether the tenants herein are entitled to any relief or the suspension of rent. So, what the court held that the rent deed is silent on the duration of the tenancy. Mere clause for increasing the rent for after 1 year cannot be understood as a tenancy being generally in the nature of requiring mandatory registration. So, what has happened in the Ramanand case has necessarily been drawn into light that the court considered various positions with regard to the tenants and their difficulties. But the court asked from the tenant whether your rent deed or the lease deed to contain a force majeure clause. So now this force majeure clause has just, it got woke up at that time, as generally none of the tenants or the landlords put in the force majeure clause in their rent agreements. So because of the lack of the force majeure clause or because of the absence of any clause with regard to the suspension of rent, the matter was decided against the tenants because the landlord has given his premises to the tenants and that too purpose of the rent. So the court was of the clear view that unless and until there is something in writing, that too signed by both of you, we cannot make or say that the landlord will not be getting the rent or there would be the suspension of rent. The outbreak of COVID-19 have already disturbed a lot of relations in the commercial fraternity, that too between the landlord and the tenants, to the huge markets, the big markets. But in the certain markets, out of courts arrangements have been made, where during the period of the COVID-19, the landlords or the market associations have made a rule that a rent out of the 165% would be paid to the landlords so as to remain harmony between the landlord and the tenant and so that the relations between both of them remain. So what we were talking about with regard to the TPA is that this registration of lease deed is very much compulsory. 11th month registration which is not registered a notary paper can certainly be said to be beneficial for the landlords in not paying the stamp duty. But when you go on relying upon any of the clauses of those rent agreements or the lease deed, if they are not registered, you will certainly not get the benefits. So it is equally important for the landlord. At the same time, it is equally important for the tenant that in our considered view, this lease deeds should be compulsorily be registered as enshrined under section 49 of the Registration Act. With this, I would like to conclude this session on this important topic, which has come up during the tough times of COVID-19. I think I have thrown the light on the subject. Over to you, Kritika.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for touching all the aspect related to the current topic in such a comprehensive way and to enlighten our young lawyers and students, and which is very necessary, and it is very important to know all these facts related to such issue which we are facing nowadays. So, and explaining them one of the most important topic in such a simplest way so that anybody can understand, even a layman can understand. So the eyes of many would get open on the subject. So last but not the least, I would like to thank all our viewers who were there with us today in such a short journey of today's webinar. And we look forward for more insightful session from you once again, sir. Thank you so much for taking out your valuable time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kriti, for giving me such a valuable thanking note from your side. And thanks to all my viewers who have always been a part of the journey of whatever webinar is conducted by us. And this was the, the most important topic which I considered was to be there, because after the unlockdown is been started. Now we have all seen that the disputes between the landlord and tenants have suddenly raised up, and there would be a plethora of cases which the court would be dealing on the aspect of suspension of the rent, or the rent to be uh, bypassed, or to be there has to be some arrangement between the landlord and the tenants in this regard. Thank you, Kriti. Thanks a lot for this. Looking forward in the future for having more webinars moderated from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.